When World War II ended, the absence of gunfire did not immediately produce peace. Across Europe and Asia, the dominant condition was silence. Not the relief of safety, but the quiet of systems that had collapsed. Railways were destroyed. Administrations had vanished. Currencies were unstable, and food distribution barely functioned. Millions were alive, but not secure. Victory and defeat mattered less than survival. For civilians, the end of combat did not mark closure. It marked uncertainty. Authority was fragmented. In many regions, armed groups still controlled territory. Former collaborators, resistance fighters, occupying forces, and returning governments all competed for legitimacy. The silence after violence concealed unresolved conflicts that would soon resurface in political, social, and ideological form. This is the defining mistake of post-war memory, assuming that peace arrives when war stops. In reality, the end of violence exposes problems that violence had temporarily suppressed. The aftermath was not calm, it was fragile, and fragility in history is often more dangerous than open conflict. Europe in 1945 was not merely damaged, it was structurally broken. Entire industrial regions were inoperative. Power grids were unreliable. Coal shortages halted production even where factories survived. Agricultural output had fallen sharply, leading to malnutrition and hunger well into the late 1940s. Governments lacked revenue, legitimacy, and administrative reach. In Eastern Europe, Soviet influence reshaped political systems rapidly. In Western Europe, fear of economic collapse fueled urgency for reconstruction. This environment explains why radical solutions gained traction. Stability became the overriding objective, sometimes at the expense of democratic process. The physical ruins were visible, but the deeper damage lay in institutions that no longer functioned. Pre-war political systems had failed catastrophically. Trust in old elites was low. Rebuilding Europe required reinventing governance, economics, and security simultaneously. The devastation was not simply a backdrop, it actively shaped every decision that followed. The human displacement caused by World War II reshaped societies more profoundly than borders. Over 30 million people were uprooted across Europe alone. Survivors of genocide, forced laborers, prisoners of war, and civilians fleeing front lines created a humanitarian crisis of unprecedented scale. Governments lacked the capacity to respond effectively. Improvised camps became semi-permanent. Aid organizations expanded rapidly, laying foundations for modern humanitarian systems. Displacement forced societies to confront uncomfortable questions: who belonged, who could return, and who would be excluded. In many cases, return was impossible. Homes were destroyed or occupied, borders had shifted, political realities changed. These unresolved movements seeded future tensions, especially in Central and Eastern Europe and the Middle East. Displacement was not a temporary side effect of war. It became a defining feature of the post-war world, shaping demographics, national identities, and long-term instability. The demand for justice after World War II collided with political reality. The scale of crimes committed made selective accountability inevitable. Trials such as those held at Nuremberg established legal precedents, including personal responsibility for state crimes. Yet justice was uneven. Many perpetrators reintegrated into society due to administrative necessity or Cold War priorities. This tension between moral reckoning and political stability defined the post-war order. The trials mattered not because they delivered perfect justice, but because they changed expectations. War crimes were no longer considered inevitable excesses of conflict. They became prosecutable acts. This shift reshaped international law permanently. At the same time, unresolved injustices fueled resentment and denial. The aftermath demonstrated that justice after total war is never complete, but abandoning it entirely carries consequences that echo for generations. World War II fatally weakened imperial systems. European powers emerged economically exhausted and politically exposed. Colonial subjects who had fought for imperial armies returned with new expectations and political awareness. The contradiction between democratic rhetoric and colonial domination became untenable. Independence movements gained momentum across Asia and Africa, often violently resisted. Decolonization unfolded unevenly, producing both liberation and instability. New states inherited borders drawn without regard for local realities. Institutions were fragile. Power vacuums led to conflict. The collapse of empire was not a clean transition. It was chaotic and often bloody. Yet it permanently altered global power distribution. The aftermath of World War II did not simply end European dominance. It redistributed authority in ways that continue to shape international relations. The war left only two states with the capacity to shape the global order: the United States and the Soviet Union. Both emerged with intact or expanded industrial bases and massive military power. Europe, Japan, and China were weakened. This imbalance structured the post-war world immediately. Cooperation between former allies gave way to suspicion. Competing ideologies hardened into strategic rivalry. Security became binary. Alignment replaced neutrality. The Cold War did not emerge accidentally. It was the logical outcome of wartime mobilization and post-war insecurity. Institutions created to manage peace became arenas of competition. The aftermath transformed global politics from multipolar complexity to bipolar tension. Reconstruction required unprecedented cooperation. Economic collapse threatened political extremism and renewed conflict. Programs designed to stabilize economies and rebuild infrastructure were driven by strategic necessity as much as generosity. Integration reduced incentives for war by tying recovery to mutual dependence. This logic reshaped Western Europe fundamentally. Cooperation was not inevitable. It was chosen because alternatives were worse. The aftermath demonstrated that peace requires active construction. Stability does not emerge organically from devastation. It must be engineered. This realization produced institutions that still structure international relations today. The psychological aftermath of the war shaped societies invisibly. Trauma was widespread but rarely articulated. Silence became common. Memory fractured along national, ideological, and generational lines. Some narratives dominated public discourse, others were suppressed. This selective memory influenced politics, education, and identity. Trauma does not disappear when ignored. It re-emerges in distorted form. The war's psychological legacy continues to shape how societies respond to crisis, authority, and violence. Understanding this dimension is essential to understanding post-war history. World War II forced the international system to confront moral limits. The scale of destruction challenged existing norms. New frameworks emerged to address genocide, human rights, and collective security. These frameworks were imperfect and inconsistently applied, but they marked a shift. Certain actions were declared unacceptable regardless of context. This moral vocabulary reshaped diplomacy and conflict. It did not prevent future atrocities, but it changed how they were judged. The aftermath embedded ethical language into global governance permanently. World War II permanently altered humanity's relationship with technology. Before the war, scientific progress was largely framed as improvement. Faster transport, better medicine, increased productivity. After the war, that innocence was gone. The conflict demonstrated that technological advancement could scale destruction faster than any political system could control it. Radar, rocketry, jet propulsion, computing, and nuclear physics all matured under wartime pressure. These innovations did not disappear with peace. They reshaped civilian life, military doctrine, and global power. The atomic bomb crystallized this transformation. For the first time, a single weapon carried the capacity to annihilate entire cities instantly. This reality forced a fundamental reassessment of what progress meant. Scientific achievement could no longer be separated from ethical responsibility. The aftermath embedded fear into innovation. Every advance carried strategic implications. Governments institutionalized research, linking science directly to national security. The post-war world became one where technological superiority equaled survival. This shift did not slow progress. It accelerated it under constant anxiety. Technology no longer promised a better future by default. It promised leverage. The war ensured that modernity itself would be defined by this tension between advancement and annihilation. Although World War II formally ended in 1945, its conflicts did not dissolve. They transformed. Many of the war's central questions remained unresolved. Borders drawn hastily created lasting disputes. Ideological divisions hardened into global rivalry. Institutions designed to prevent war became instruments of competition. The Cold War was not a new conflict, but a continuation of unresolved wartime dynamics under different rules. Proxy wars erupted across Asia, Africa, and the Middle East, often along fault lines created or intensified by World War II. Former colonies struggled with borders and systems imposed during imperial collapse. Germany's division symbolized a broader fragmentation of the world. Even memory became contested. Different societies remembered different wars, emphasizing some experiences while suppressing others. This selective memory shaped politics and identity for generations. The war never fully ended because its structural consequences were never fully resolved. It embedded itself into global systems, military alliances, economic institutions, and security doctrines. Understanding World War II as an ongoing historical force, rather than a closed chapter, is essential. The fighting stopped. The forces it unleashed did not. The aftermath of World War II reveals a truth that is often uncomfortable. History does not reset when a war ends. The conflict reshaped the world through decisions made under extreme pressure, fear, and uncertainty. Those decisions hardened into borders, alliances, institutions, and security systems that continue to shape global politics. Many of the people who made them did not fully understand their long-term consequences. Yet those structures outlived them. The war did not simply destroy and rebuild. It reordered priorities, normalized permanent readiness for conflict, and embedded crisis thinking into governance. The modern world was constructed around the memory of near collapse. This is the lasting legacy of World War II. Not a lesson of inevitability, but of consequence. When choices narrow and pressure replaces reflection, decisions echo far beyond their moment. The moment passes. The consequences remain.